What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and here's some footage of Star Wars Unlimited. This time I've been playing Aggression Leia, kind of testing out a different aggro deck compared to the Sabine build that I've been using earlier, and I'm playing against a Hera Double Green build, so we'll see how this goes. Um, my opponent Dreadnought here. Um, and we're gonna play some games. So I win the initial roll off to see who goes first, and I have a pretty good starting hand, so I can lead off here with the Battlefield Marine. Battlefield Marine, 2 cost 3/3 vanilla, very strong initial drop. My opponent plays C3PO. Honestly, not the worst thing you could play in response to a Battlefield Marine. So C3PO is 1/4, which means the Marine cannot just attack and defeat him immediately. My opponent also guesses 2 with C3PO's ability and ends up hitting him Alliance X-Wing. So honestly, not a bad start for Dreadnought here. The Battlefield Marine can honestly be kind of an impressive force in some situations, but in this scenario, it looks like there's a pretty decent response. So I draw K2. Um, I'm going to resource this Keep Fighting here, I think. That's kind of a card for pushing more damage, and I don't quite need that right now. So the Battlefield Marine just going to swing on in there for 3 damage to the enemy base. My opponent plays a Wing Leader, buffing C3PO. This is kind of an unwelcome development, but the good news is that I'm playing Tarkin Town, so if my opponent uses that buffed C3PO to defeat my Battlefield Marine, I have kind of a natural response. I'm going to play Benthic 2 Tubes. 1 cost 2/2 on attack. A friendly aggression unit gains raid 2. C3PO indeed takes out the Marine. So then I'm gonna deploy this A-Wing that I have in hand. Leia quite likes having multiple units on the board to use her ability. My opponent then takes the initiative, and yeah, there's Tarkin Town. Epic action to deal 3 damage to to a damaged non-leader unit, and that's going to defeat the experienced C3PO and kind of clear the way for the ground arena. So now, with these actions being taken, I can gain a significant advantage by using Leia's ability if my opponent doesn't remove one of my units. So Leia's leader ability allows you to attack with a rebel unit and then attack with another rebel unit. So in this situation, I could use the ability to attack with Benthic 2 Tubes. That would his on attack ability would give raid 2 to the Green Squadron A-Wing, and I could then attack with the Green Squadron A-Wing immediately as part of the same action, making it so that my opponent doesn't have a chance to respond, and having the additional 2 damage from Benthic 2 Tubes. So I'm actually not a great fan of Benthic 2 Tubes in a Sabine build necessarily, but I think he is really good for Leia because he synergizes very well with Leia's ability. However, my opponent counters this by using the Energy Conversion Lab to ambush Benthic 2 Tubes with Ezra Bridger. I am going to, so I'm really thinking there's really 2 options here. So one is that I could play red 3 and then attack. That would get me 1 more point of damage immediately, but it would sort of waste a resource. So I think the other thing that I could do here, playing out K2SO, would probably be more desirable. And so I don't play out the red 3, I instead play K2. So K2 is a 4 cost 4/4 with Overwhelm. So Overwhelm deals extra damage to the enemy base if you defeat a unit with an attack and have damage left over. But additionally, when he's defeated, you can either deal 3 damage to the enemy base, or you can it's either 3 damage to the enemy base or make them discard a card from hand. My opponent ambushes K2 with Agent Callus. And so that ends up being a trade. They're both 4/4, so they defeat each other. My opponent draws a card from Callus's ability, and I'm going to trigger K2's when defeated to deal 3 damage to the enemy base. So even though my opponent was able to eliminate K2 immediately, I still got some value there. Then the A-Wing is going to swing in for 3. My opponent swings for 2. So in this case, I could play red 3 and then use the A-Wing, but the I want to try and swing first before my opponent does anything. However, I think that if I were going for red three, I would actually be able to do it safely here since my opponent has used all their resources. This is what they call being tapped out in Magic the Gathering. But because my opponent is tapped out here, I could have played red three with no potential reprisal. Um, However, I think what I end up doing here is I'm going for the wing leader buffing Leia rather than playing red three this turn. My opponent does have Ezra on the board, but doesn't really have a great attack to make with him. If Ezra attacks Leia, he will be defeated and Leia will survive. If Ezra attacks the base, it doesn't really do all that much. 3 damage to my base, it's progress, but it's not I'm still well ahead in the race at this point, and it isn't probably going to be crucial. So then I play Wing Leader buffing Sabine. Or I said Sabine. I'm so used to playing Sabine in these aggro builds. Wing Leader buffing Leia. Um, and Leia's gonna just swing into the enemy base for 6. And then I play a Metal Ceremony, giving 1 experience to the X-Wing and 1 experience to the A-Wing and 1 experience to Leia. I do think that the Wing Leader it might have been better to play Red 3 there rather than the Wing Leader, because Red 3, each of them would have been worth 2 damage this turn. Each of them would have been worth 2 damage in theory next turn, but Red 3 is a more valuable unit. And at this point, I think my opponent is conceding the game, reveals an attack pattern delta that didn't end up getting played. Um, and yeah, interesting game. Ultimately, that was one where I was able to get some value with some aggressive stuff. My opponent had the wing leader buffed C3PO, but because Tarkin Town is the base here, I was able to deal with that relatively easily. So this is one of the things that I think that Aggression Leia most notably does better than decks like Sabine is that because you have Tarkentown, you can deal with buffed enemy units much more easily. So for Sabine, you might have to have a waylay or something like, or a disabling fang fighter or something to deal with a really buffed enemy unit. But with Leia, where you have that counter kind of built in with Tarkentown, it's a lot easier to get some of those units off the field. If someone ends up buffing a unit and killing one of your early units, you can often just use Tarkin Town and clear them immediately. Or even if it's a situation where it's not necessarily a buff, but just like a strong early game unit, like you play an A-Wing, next turn your opponent plays the Falcon and kills it, you can Tarkin Town their Falcon off the board if you want. So that's an interesting dynamic. It really does give you some options. Whereas Sabine Yellow tends to run Jeddah City, which is in my opinion a weaker base. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think it's amazing. And that's one of those things. So now we're going to go on to game two, and we're going to see how this goes. That was a relatively quick one. So I think I have a starting hand there with no 1 or 2 drops, which is definitely a mulligan. And I'm mulligan into one. At first, I was worried that this was also not going to be a good starting hand, but I see the good old Battlefield Marine, a really good starting card. Mm. So let's see how this one turns out. I'm thinking about my resourcing decision. I end up resourcing K2 here since he's kind of a later game card. Oh no, maybe I bulk at that. I was thinking of resourcing K2 because he's kind of a later game card. There's an argument also for resourcing this precision fire. I've resourced Benthic 2 tubes because I don't have I only really want to start with him if I have another 1 cost red unit. So basically, like, I like 2 tubes, but I usually only want to start with him if I have a Spec Force soldier to go with him. Because he really wants another red unit to synergize with. If we see another 1 cost red rebel, that would be really useful, but I don't think we're gonna do that. So, uh, however, he's still a quite useful card to have, even if you're not necessarily deploying him on the first turn. We have a very similar start this game. I have the Alliance Marine. My opponent has C3PO. This time we both have wing leaders, though. My opponent ends up deciding to send C3PO into my base for 3 damage, and that's a scenario that I'm very happy with this because I am a faster deck in my opinion. So there's a famous article in Magic the Gathering called "Who's the Beatdown?" that talks about how a really important skill is assessing which player needs to be aggressive and which player needs to be more defensive. And I think this is a very important skill in Fab also. In general, if you think you're the faster, more aggressive deck, you want to be pushing damage to the enemy base. If you think that you're the slower deck, you want to be trying to prolong the game, making trades, taking out enemy units, and preventing damage from the base, because damage to the base brings the game closer towards its ending. So in this situation, I definitely think that I am the aggressor. And as a result of that, I am going to be focused on pushing damage to the enemy, and we'll see how it goes. So then I use Leia's ability for a double attack here. My opponent plays an Alliance X-Wing. My opponent then trades Wing Leaders. My opponent led this turn off by playing a Battlefield Marine. I think it would have been more advantageous if they're trying to slow down the game to trade Wing Leaders at the start. That would have saved 2 damage. I play K2. C-3PO continues to attack into my base, which I'm honestly fine with. I believe that I am faster here, and it's possible my opponent is going to try to make a big play with attack pattern delta, which can actually be worth a lot of damage. So it's a 3-cost card that gives 1 unit +3/+3, 1 unit +2/+2, 1 unit +1/+1. So that is a lot of damage if not answered. It's +6. But in this situation, my hope is that I can just go faster enough that it won't matter. Hera deploys after Leia, so Hera deploys on 6 resources while Leia deploys on 5. So this turn, again, I lead off immediately using Leia's ability. So that's going to be K2 attacking for 4, and the Battlefield Marine attacks for 5, leaving my opponent on 4 life. We indeed see attack pattern delta, so he buffs the Marine with +3/+3, so it's now a 6/6. C-3PO gets +2/+2, so he is now a 5/9, and the X-Wing gets +1/+1, making it a 3/4. So in this situation, what I want to do is deploy Leia and attack and destroy the enemy base. If I deploy Leia, he can immediately be defeated by that Marine. So I end up playing an open fire on the Battlefield Marine, inflicting 4 damage. This doesn't defeat it immediately, but my thinking is now I can Tarkin Town it off the board, then deploy Leia. Um, and then Leia will be in a position to close the game. And I can also potentially play the Green Squadron A-Wing this turn, though because my opponent has that buffed X-Wing that could defeat it in one shot, I would not want to do that unless it had already attacked. It might just end up, depending on how this goes, we could end up seeing me just take the initiative and try to attack at the start of the next turn with K2 or with my Marine to close out the game. My opponent, thinking about what to do, ends up deciding to use the Wounded Marine to trade with my Marine. That would normally be really good value. The problem is that the Wounded Marine was the only unit that was suppressing Leia. So Leia can now deploy, and my opponent's in kind of a dilemma. Uh, because if Leia gets to attack, that's the game. And indeed, we see my opponent concede. So the opponent shows the hand here, and we did have a academy training. So if we had played the academy training on C-3PO immediately, that would have meant that he could have, or like, let's say that I play the open fire and then he plays academy training C-3PO. If that had happened, he would then be in a position to respond to and clear Leia as soon as she deployed, which would be advantageous for my opponent. The problem is after that happened, I could just take the initiative and K2 could attack the enemy base next turn and clear it. So I think I was kind of just too ahead at that point. The attack pattern delta did represent a lot of value, but it was sort of too late in the game because there had just been too much of a discrepancy in the damage dealt to the base at that point. And even though in theory my opponent could have gotten a lot of value there, uh, it was too little too late. So we are going to go into a game 3. Currently 2-0 with Leia Red against this Hera build, and we'll see if I can make that 3-0. Okay. My opponent leads off with Sabine Explosives Artist, and I'm going to play a Green Squadron A-Wing. So Sabine Explosives Artist, 2 cost 2/3, can't be attacked if there are at least 3 aspects among other friendly units, and on attack can deal 1 damage to the defending unit or to a base. So very strong early card, kind of a fake 3/3 in that her ability allows you to do 3 damage on attack to an enemy unit. You can also attack, deal 2 damage to a unit and 1 damage to the base, which is better than being a 3/3 in some situations. The downside is that, of course, isn't active when she's on the defense, which means that, for instance, a Battlefield Marine or another copy of Sabine Explosives Artist can attack into her and defeat her while remaining alive. My opponent goes for a wing leader buffing Sabine. I play a fleet lieutenant sending my A-wing into the base for 5. If my opponent uses Sabine to defeat the fleet lieutenant, I can use Tarkin Town, but my opponent ends up pushing damage to the base. And it's an interesting situation. I'm kind of happy to see my opponent going for the base because I do think that I'm faster. On the other hand, I do think that if he had gone to clear the fleet lieutenant and I had removed Sabine with Tarkentown, that would probably be more favorable for me. So I feel like, I don't know, overall I feel quite equipped to handle this situation. I've taken the initiative, and since my opponent didn't kill the fleet lieutenant, I'm going to immediately use Leia's ability, attack with both units, that's 6 damage. My opponent plays a fleet lieutenant of his own, attacking with the wing leader at +2 power and defeating my A-wing. So we now have a cleared board in space. I deploy a battlefield marine. My opponent still has Sabine with that 2 experience from the wing leader earlier. I am ahead. I've done 11 damage to my opponent's base while my opponent's only done 5, and my opponent can now either. Oh, yeah. So my opponent decides, actually, in that situation, I want to use the energy conversion lab to ambush my your fleet lieutenant with my fleet lieutenant after I do the when played. So I allow that. So the lieutenants there trade. Then he's going to continue pushing damage to the base with his Sabine. I'm going to deploy my own Sabine, and my opponent takes the initiative. So right now we're pretty close on the race. I have done 1 more damage to the opponent, but the thing is, my leader deploys faster. I can attack with both my units efficiently, and I actually have more damage on field right now. I can do, if both of my units attack the base and his unit attacks the base, I do 6 and my opponent does 5. So I do think that I have an advantage in the racing scenario, but we'll have to see. My opponent has definitely chosen to race this game rather than using his Sabine to try to clear my units. Maybe thinking like, oh, if I clear one of these units, he'll just Tarkin Town me and get a valuable unit off the board. Not sure if that's exactly what my opponent's thinking, but it would maybe be a reasonable thought. Let's see what happens here. So we are on the important 5 resource turn where Sabine is going to get to deploy. Um, my opponent ends up having his Sabine defeat my Sabine, using the on attack ability to deal 1 damage to the base. This is one of the benefits of Sabine Explosives Artist, is that if you're defeating an enemy unit and you don't need all your power, you can use your on attack to damage the enemy base instead, which will then allow you to get some extra value out of that attack. That's the part that's a little better than just being 3/3. So then I have the Battlefield Marine just swing into the enemy base for 3 damage. My opponent deploys Kanan, 4 cost 4/5, and when he attacks, I have to mill my top card, and my opponent heals equal based on the number of aspects on the card. I believe different aspects. Might just be aspects, not sure. I deploy Leia Organa. My opponent takes the initiative, and I have a pile of buffs for Leia here. First, we have a wing leader giving her +2. Then we have an academy training giving her another +2/+2. So now Leia can attack and deal 8 damage, which is going to leave my opponent very low. And then I'm also going to play a medal ceremony, giving 1 experience to the Marine and a further 1 experience to Leia. Then I use Tarkentown to defeat my opponent's Sabine. So now we're in a situation where I am very far ahead. My opponent only has 3 life. Yeah, so my opponent only has 3 life. My Leia, it has +5/+5, so is now actually a 8/11 with raid 1, so can defeat the enemy base in 1 hit. My Marine is a 4/4, can also defeat the enemy base in 1 hit. My opponent does have Kanan, so Kanan can attack and clear my Marine. I have a precision fire that would allow me to get past a Sentinel. It's really a really nasty situation. My opponent ends up conceding the game. Okay, so those were three games with Leia Aggression versus Hera Double Green, and it seemed like unfortunately Hera just wasn't quite fast enough. In fact, I'm not sure we actually saw Hera get a chance to deploy in any of these games. Um, Hera, or at least the Double Green combination, didn't really seem to be able to curb Leia's aggression in these games. That's not to say Hera is like definitely bad or is going to be totally unable to deal with that. It's possible that will change in the future, but I do think that ultimately, at least right now, it seemed like it was a struggle. There wasn't really, so we didn't see command played. Command can be really good in that it can give you experience or it can give you ramp while also clearing an enemy unit. But the problem is it's kind of conditional because you have to have a unit of your own that has enough power to defeat the enemy unit. Maybe you buff it with the +2/+2 before doing that, which gives you a little bit more reach, but then you're not going to use it to ramp. And then additionally, it only targets non-unique units, which means that a lot of the time it might not even work. So for instance, you can't play command to defeat Sabine Wren. You can't play it to defeat Red 3. On the other hand, there might have been some opportunities to use command to clear out a battlefield marine or something like that, which could have been valuable. But one way or another, didn't end up being used this game, and it seemed like ultimately the Leia build was just a bit too fast. So we'll see how that progresses. I'm sure Hera has quite a few cards left that haven't been previewed yet. Both some more Spectre cards and some more green Rebel cards. So we'll see whether or not she becomes stronger in the future. But for now, it feels like Aggression Leia is pretty ahead in this matchup. So I'll have a link to my aggression deck list in the video description below. Thanks to you all for watching, and we'll be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.